Welcome back, everyone. Today we're really excited to dive into a book that's been making waves, Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yeah, it's been one of those books that really seems to have resonated with a lot of people.
It has, and for good reason. It's packed with practical advice on how to build better habits and break bad ones. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I think it's worth taking a moment to talk about the author himself, James Clear.
Yeah, so Clear wasn't always a habit guru. He was actually a college athlete who suffered a pretty severe injury.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was a pretty life-altering experience for him. And during his recovery, he started to explore the power of habits as a way to rebuild his life and achieve his goals. And that personal journey really informs the book. You can tell that he's not just writing from a theoretical perspective, he's speaking from experience.
Right. That makes sense. So for those who haven't read Atomic Habits yet, what's the core idea that Clear is driving at?
Well, the central premise is deceptively simple. Small changes, consistently applied over time, yield remarkable results. It's not about making massive overnight transformations, but rather about harnessing the power of tiny, incremental improvements, what he calls atomic habits.
I love that term, atomic habits. It really captures the essence of the book. It's about those small, seemingly insignificant actions that we repeat day after day, which ultimately shape our lives.
Exactly. And to illustrate this point, Clear uses a really powerful analogy in the book. He talks about heating an ice cube. Imagine you're gradually increasing the temperature of an ice cube. From 25 degrees to 31 degrees, nothing seems to be happening. It's still a solid block of ice.
Right. But then you hit that critical point.
Exactly. At 32 degrees, the ice melts. It's a sudden and dramatic transformation, but it's the result of those gradual, incremental increases in temperature.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
This is what Clear calls the plateau of latent potential. You might not see immediate results from your efforts, but the work is accumulating beneath the surface. Those small changes are adding up, even if you can't see them yet. And then at a certain point, you hit that tipping point and breakthrough occurs.
That's a brilliant analogy. It really highlights why we often give up on new habits too soon. We don't see those dramatic results right away, so we get discouraged and quit.
Right. But Atomic Habits urges us to think long-term, to trust the process, and to keep showing up even when we don't feel like it.
Because those small efforts, compounded over time, can lead to extraordinary results.
Exactly. Now, to help us build those positive habits, Clear lays out a framework he calls the 4 laws of behavior change. Think of these as the fundamental principles for hacking the habit loop.
Okay, and just for a quick refresher, the habit loop consists of 4 stages: cue, craving, response, and reward.
Right. The cue is the trigger that initiates the habit. The craving is the desire or motivation behind the habit. The response is the action you take, and the reward is the positive reinforcement that strengthens the habit.
Got it. So how do these 4 laws apply to each stage of the habit loop?
Well, each law corresponds to one of the 4 stages. Law 1, make it obvious, is about making the cue more noticeable. Law 2, make it attractive, focuses on increasing the craving. Law 3, make it easy, simplifies the response. And Law 4, make it satisfying, amplifies the reward.
That's a really clear and concise way to break it down. So let's dive into each law, starting with Law 1, make it obvious. What does that really mean in practice?
Well, it starts with awareness. Clear suggests creating what he calls a habit scorecard. It's basically a list of your current habits, both good and bad. The idea is to become more aware of your automatic behaviors so you can start to shape them.
So it's like taking inventory of your current habits, both positive and negative, so you can identify areas where you want to focus your efforts.
Exactly. And this idea of the habit scorecard is actually inspired by something called the point-and-call system used by Japanese railway conductors.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
So in the Japanese railway system, conductors are trained to point and call out each signal to minimize errors. It's a way of making their actions more deliberate and reducing the risk of mistakes.
I see. So it's about bringing those automatic behaviors into our conscious awareness.
Exactly. And once you're aware of your habits, you can start shaping them using what Clear calls implementation intentions. These are basically specific plans about when and where you'll perform a desired action.
So instead of vaguely saying, I want to exercise more, you'd say, I'll go for a 20-minute run at 7 a.m. in the park every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. By making it concrete, you're removing the guesswork and making the habit more obvious to your brain.
Precisely. It's about eliminating that decision fatigue and creating a clear trigger for the desired behavior.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay,
That's
cool.
Law 1. Make it obvious. What about Law 2? Make it attractive. This is where the brain chemistry comes into play, right?
Right. This law taps into the brain's reward system. Our brains are wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So if we want to build a habit, we need to make it enjoyable, or at least find a way to associate it with pleasure.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we make something like exercise or eating healthy more appealing?
Well, one way is to pair the habit with something you already enjoy. For example, if you love listening to podcasts, you could only allow yourself to listen to your favorite podcasts while you're exercising. Or if you're trying to eat healthier, you could make a delicious and healthy meal that you actually look forward to eating.
That's a great idea. It's about making those healthy habits more enticing by associating them with something you already enjoy.
Exactly. And this is also where social influence comes in. We're wired to imitate the habits of those around us, particularly close friends, wider social groups, and those we admire.
So if you want to build a habit, it helps to surround yourself with people who already have that habit.
Absolutely. Clear tells this fascinating story about the Polgar sisters who were raised by their father to become chess prodigies. Their entire environment was designed around chess. The house was full of chess books, they played constantly, and it became their normal.
And all three sisters achieved incredible success in the chess world, right?
They did. It just
yeah.
goes to show how powerful it is to be part of a culture that reinforces the habits you want to build. So take a look at your own life. Are the people you surround yourself with, the environments you frequent, and the information you consume supporting the habits and identity you want to cultivate?
That's a great question for all of us to consider. All right, moving on to Law 3. Make it easy. This is all about reducing friction, right?
Yes. The easier a habit is to perform, the more likely we are to stick with it. If we want to build a new habit, we need to remove any obstacles that stand in our way. Clear uses examples like Japanese manufacturers redesigning their workspaces to eliminate wasted motion and companies streamlining user experiences to make things easier for their customers.
Right. It's about making those desired behaviors as effortless as possible.
Exactly. And one of the most effective strategies for making habits easier is what Clear calls the 2-minute rule.
Ah, yes. The 2-minute rule. This is one of my favorite takeaways from the book. Can you explain it for our listeners who might not be familiar with it?
Absolutely. The 2-minute rule is all about starting small. The idea is to break down any new habit into a version that takes 2 minutes or less to do.
So instead of trying to meditate for 30 minutes, you start with just 2 minutes. Or instead of aiming to write a whole chapter, you just write one paragraph. It's about making it so easy that you can't say no.
Right. Exactly. The goal is to make the habit so easy that you'll actually do it. And once you've overcome that initial inertia, you're much more likely to continue.
It's like tricking your brain into getting started.
Yeah.
And once you're in motion, it's easier to keep going.
Exactly. The 2-minute rule is such a simple but powerful tool for building new habits.
I agree. And it can be applied to virtually any area of life, from exercise to work to relationships.
Absolutely. Now, the final law, Law 4, make it satisfying, is all about making sure that the habit is rewarding.
This one seems pretty straightforward. We're more likely to repeat behaviors that make us feel good.
It is, but there's an important nuance here. Our brains are wired for instant gratification. We want to feel good now, not later. So even if a habit has long-term benefits, if it doesn't feel rewarding in the short term, we're less likely to stick with it.
Okay, so how do we make our good habits more immediately satisfying?
Well, one way is to use visual measures like habit trackers. Seeing those check marks on a calendar or those filled-in squares can be incredibly motivating. It gives you a sense of progress and reinforces the positive association with the habit.
It's like a visual reminder of your accomplishments, which can be really encouraging.
Exactly. And Clear tells this inspiring story in the book about a public health intervention in Pakistan. They were trying to encourage hand washing to combat the spread of disease, but simply providing soap wasn't enough.
Right. People weren't necessarily motivated to change their behavior, even though it was clearly in their best interest.
Exactly. So they introduced this new soap that foamed nicely and had a pleasant scent. And the results were incredible. Hand washing rates skyrocketed, and the positive effects lasted even years after the intervention ended.
Wow, that's amazing. So they made hand washing a more enjoyable experience, and it led to a significant and lasting change of behavior.
Exactly. They made it satisfying, and it stuck.
That's such a great example. It really underscores the power of making those immediate rewards tangible, even in something as simple as hand washing.
Absolutely. It's a powerful reminder that even small tweaks can make a big difference when it comes to building lasting habits.
So we've covered the 4 laws of behavior change. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. They're a fantastic framework for understanding how habits work and how we can change them.
Right. And the beauty of these laws is that they can be applied to virtually any habit you want to build or break.
Absolutely. Now, there's another layer to atomic habits that I find particularly fascinating, the idea of identity-based habits. What's Clear's perspective on that?
So this is where things get really interesting. Clear argues that our habits shape our identity, and conversely, our identity shapes our habits. It's a powerful feedback loop.
So you're saying that our actions not only reflect who we are, but also contribute to who we become.
Exactly. True behavior change, she says, starts with believing you are the type of person who does that behavior.
It's about aligning your actions with your self-perception.
Right. For instance, if you want to be a writer, you don't just start writing. You begin to see yourself as a writer, embracing that identity. And as you write more consistently, that identity gets reinforced, making it easier to stick with the habit.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You embody the change you want to see, and it becomes a part of who you are.
Precisely. And this leads us to one of the most practical and powerful strategies in atomic habits: habit stacking.
Ah, yes. Habit stacking. This is where we leverage our existing routines to build new habits, right?
Exactly. Habit stacking is all about linking a new behavior to an already established habit. For example, if you already have a solid morning routine, you could add a new habit like meditating for 5 minutes right after you brush your teeth.
So the existing habit of brushing your teeth becomes the trigger for the new habit of meditation.
Exactly. You're basically piggybacking on an existing neural pathway, making it easier for the new behavior to take hold.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's such a simple but effective way to build new habits into our lives.
Right. And it can be applied to virtually any area of life. The key is to identify those existing routines that can serve as anchors for the new behaviors you want to incorporate.
Now, we've talked about building good habits, but what about breaking bad habits? Does Clear offer any strategies for that?
He does, and it's based on the principle of inversion. It's basically applying the 4 laws in reverse. You make the bad habit invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Can you give us an example?
Sure. One of my favorite examples from the book is the story of the invention of the first cash register.
I've heard about this. It was invented by a saloon owner named James Ritty, right?
Yes. Back in the 1880s, Ritty was having problems with employees stealing money. There was no way to track transactions accurately.
And this is before the days of security cameras and digital records.
Exactly. So Ritty got the idea for a machine that would automatically record every transaction and lock the cash away, making it much harder for employees to steal.
And that's how the cash register was born. It's a brilliant example of how making a bad habit difficult can lead to dramatic results.
Absolutely. And in our digital age, we have even more tools at our disposal for making bad habits difficult. Think about website blockers that prevent us from accessing distracting websites or apps that limit our screen time.
Or even something as simple as putting your phone in another room when you're trying to focus.
Exactly. It's all about designing our environment to align with our goals.
That's a key theme throughout Atomic Habits, isn't it? It's not just about willpower or motivation. It's about creating systems that support our desired behaviors.
Absolutely. We need to set ourselves up for success by making it easier to do the right things and harder to succumb to those tempting bad habits.
I think that's a great place to wrap up this part of our discussion. We've covered a lot of ground, from the 4 laws of behavior change to the importance of identity and the power of systems. But before we move on, I'd love to hear from our listeners. What are some of your favorite takeaways from Atomic Habits? What strategies have you found most helpful in building better habits and breaking bad ones? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And be sure to join us for the next part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some of the more nuanced aspects of Atomic Habits and how we can apply these principles to create lasting positive change in our lives.
I'm really looking forward to it. It's amazing how applicable these concepts are. You can use them for so many different things.
Oh, absolutely. Clear gives examples of how these principles have been used to improve everything from businesses to schools to even entire communities. It's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, he really emphasizes that these ideas aren't just for individuals. They can be applied to any group or organization that's looking to create positive change.
It's about creating a culture of continuous improvement.
Right, and it all starts with those small atomic habits. Now, one thing that I found particularly insightful in Atomic Habits is Clear's discussion of the 4 stages of habit formation. He calls them the 4 laws of behavior change.
Right. We touched on those briefly in the last part. Can you remind our listeners what those 4 laws are?
Sure. The 4 laws of behavior change are make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. And they correspond to the 4 stages of the habit loop: cue, craving, response, and reward.
Okay, so let's break those down a bit further, starting with the first law. Make it obvious. How do we make the cue for a desired habit more obvious?
Well, Clear suggests a few strategies. One is to use what he calls habit stacking. This is where you link a new habit to an existing one. For example, if you always make coffee in the morning, you could use that as a cue to start meditating for 5 minutes.
So the existing habit of making coffee becomes the trigger for the new habit of meditating.
Exactly. It's about leveraging the power of association. Another strategy is to use visual cues. For example, if you want to start flossing more regularly, you could leave your floss right next to your toothbrush, where you'll see it every time you brush your teeth.
It's about making those cues more prominent in your environment, so you're more likely to notice them and act on them.
Right. Now, the second law, make it attractive, is all about increasing the craving for the habit.
So how do we do that? How do we make something like exercising or eating healthy more appealing?
Well, one way is to focus on the benefits of the habit. How will this habit improve your life? Will it make you healthier, happier, more productive? Focus on those positive outcomes and remind yourself of them regularly.
So it's about associating the habit with those positive feelings and rewards.
Exactly. And another way to make a habit more attractive is to join a culture where that habit is the norm. For example, if you want to start running, join a running club. Surround yourself with people who already have that habit, and it will become more appealing to you.
It's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Right. Our social environment has a huge impact on our habits. Now, the third law, make it easy, is all about reducing friction and making the habit as simple to perform as possible.
This is where the 2-minute rule comes in, right?
Exactly. The 2-minute rule is such a powerful tool for making habits easier. The idea is to break down any new habit into a version that takes 2 minutes or less to do.
So instead of trying to write a whole chapter of your book, you just commit to writing for 2 minutes.
Exactly. The goal is to remove any barriers to action and make it as easy as possible to get started. Once you've overcome that initial inertia, you're much more likely to continue.
That's such a brilliant strategy. It's about tricking your brain into getting started.
Right. Now, the final law, make it satisfying, is all about making sure that the habit is rewarding.
And as we discussed in the last part, our brains are wired for instant gratification. So we need to make sure that our good habits feel good in the short term, even if the ultimate payoff is further down the road.
Exactly, and one of the best ways to make a habit satisfying is to use a habit tracker. Tracking your progress visually can be incredibly motivating. It gives you a sense of accomplishment and reinforces the positive association with the habit.
It's like a visual reminder of your success.
Right. And another way to make a habit satisfying is to reward yourself for sticking with it. Now, the reward doesn't have to be anything big or expensive. It could be something as simple as watching your favorite TV show, taking a relaxing bath, or listening to your favorite music.
The key is to find something that you genuinely enjoy and that reinforces the positive association with the habit.
Absolutely. Now, one thing that I find really fascinating about these 4 laws is that they can be applied in reverse to break bad habits.
Oh, right. You mentioned that in the last part. Can you give us an example of how that works?
Sure. Let's say you want to break the habit of watching too much TV. You could apply the 4 laws in reverse like this. First, make it invisible. Put your TV away in a closet or cover it with a sheet. Second, make it unattractive. Remind yourself of the negative consequences of watching too much TV. Maybe it's making you less productive or preventing you from spending time with loved ones. Third, make it difficult. Unplug your TV after each use or cancel your cable subscription. And finally, make it unsatisfying. Don't allow yourself to snack while watching TV or make a rule that you have to do 10 push-ups for every hour of TV you watch.
Those are great strategies. It's about making those bad habits less appealing and harder to perform.
Exactly. Now, one of the things that I love about Atomic Habits is that it's not just about individual change. Clear also talks about how these principles can be applied to families, teams, and organizations.
That's right. He gives some really inspiring examples of how these ideas have been used to create positive change in a variety of settings.
For example, he talks about how the British cycling team used the principles of Atomic Habits to transform their performance and become one of the most successful cycling teams in the world.
Wow, that's amazing. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, basically, they started by focusing on small, incremental improvements. They made tiny changes to their equipment, their training routines, their diet, and their recovery strategies. And over time, those small changes added up to a huge difference in their performance.
It's a great example of the power of compounding. Those small, consistent efforts, compounded over time, can lead to extraordinary results.
Exactly. And Clear also talks about how companies like Google and Facebook have used the principles of atomic habits to create highly productive and innovative work environments.
So these ideas can really be applied to any group or organization that's looking to improve.
Absolutely. It's all about creating a culture of continuous improvement, where everyone is focused on making those small, incremental changes that ultimately lead to big results.
Now, as we wrap up this part of our discussion, I'd like to touch on one more aspect of atomic habits that I found particularly insightful. Clear's discussion of the importance of identity. He argues that our habits shape our identity, and conversely, our identity shapes our habits.
It's a powerful feedback loop. Our actions not only reflect who we are, but also contribute to who we become.
So if you want to change your behavior for good, you need to start by changing your beliefs about yourself.
Exactly. If you see yourself as a healthy person, you're more likely to make healthy choices. If you see yourself as a successful person, you're more likely to take actions that lead to success.
It's about creating a self-image that supports the habits you want to build.
Right, and it's not about faking it or pretending to be someone you're not. It's about making those small, consistent changes that gradually reshape your self-perception.
It's about becoming the person you want to be, one small habit at a time.
Exactly. Now, before we move on to the next part of our discussion, I'd like to hear from our listeners. What are some of the habits that have had the biggest impact on your life? What strategies have you found most helpful in building those positive habits and breaking those negative ones? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And be sure to join us for the final part of our deep dive into atomic habits, where we'll explore some of the more nuanced aspects of the book and how we can apply these principles to create lasting positive change in our lives. It really is about recognizing that small improvements accumulate over time and ultimately lead to significant results.
It's about playing the long game and trusting the process.
Exactly. Now, one thing that I found particularly helpful in Atomic Habits is Clear's discussion of the importance of environment. He argues that our environment plays a huge role in shaping our habits. We're much more likely to stick with a habit if our environment supports it.
So it's not just about willpower. It's about setting ourselves up for success by creating an environment that makes it easier to do the right things.
Right. For example, if you want to start eating healthier, get rid of all the junk food in your house and stock your fridge with healthy snacks. If you want to exercise more, make sure you have comfortable workout clothes and a designated space to work out.
It's about making those desired behaviors as convenient and accessible as possible.
Exactly. And conversely, if you want to break a bad habit, make it more difficult by removing the triggers from your environment. For example, if you're trying to quit smoking, get rid of all your ashtrays and lighters, and avoid places where you're likely to smoke.
It's about minimizing temptation and making it harder to succumb to those bad habits.
Right. Now, another key takeaway from Atomic Habits is the importance of tracking your progress. Clear recommends using a habit tracker to monitor your habits and see how you're doing.
Tracking your progress can be really motivating. It gives you a sense of accomplishment and helps you stay on track.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can use a simple notebook or spreadsheet, or there are lots of great habit tracking apps available.
The key is to find a system that works for you and stick with it.
Right. And don't be afraid to experiment with different tracking methods until you find one that you like. Now, as we wrap up our discussion of Atomic Habits, I'd like to leave our listeners with a challenge. What's one small habit that you can start building today? It doesn't have to be anything big or drastic, just something small and manageable. Maybe it's drinking a glass of water first thing in the morning, or taking a 10-minute walk during your lunch break, or reading for 20 minutes before bed. Whatever it is, commit to doing it consistently for the next 30 days and see what happens. You might be surprised at the impact that one small habit can have on your life.
That's a great challenge. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. Share your goals with a friend or family member, or join an online community for support. And be sure to check out James Clear's website and social media for more resources and inspiration.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Atomic Habits. And remember, small changes repeated consistently over time yield remarkable results.
Until next time, keep building those atomic habits.